May 28, 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, Hawaii. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood ankle-deep in seawater at the bottom of dry dock number 1, his khaki uniform already dark with moisture. Around him, shipyard workers continued pumping water from the massive concrete basin, while others examined the battered hull of the USS Yorktown towering above them. The aircraft carrier, just returned from the Battle of the Coral Sea, bore the scars of Japanese bombs and near misses, torn metal plating, sheared rivets, and a hull so damaged that it had left an oil slick 10 miles long during its journey back to Hawaii. Captain Elliot Buckmaster, the Yorktown's commanding officer, pointed to a particularly severe section of damage along the port side. "This entire 24-foot section needs to be replaced, Admiral. The hull is buckled inward, and most of the support frames behind it are warped beyond repair." Nimitz nodded silently, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he methodically assessed each damaged section. Pearl Harbor's most experienced yard superintendent, Captain Claude Gillette, stood nearby with a clipboard of preliminary repair estimates. "What's your assessment, Captain Gillette?" Nimitz finally asked. 3 months minimum at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, sir," Gillette replied without hesitation. "The damage is extensive. We'd need to rebuild entire sections of the internal structure." Nimitz turned to face the two officers, water still swirling around his ankles as the pumps labored to empty the dry dock. His next words would shock everyone present and set in motion one of the most remarkable feats of emergency naval repair in history. "We must have this ship back in 3 days." A long silence followed as the men exchanged glances, certain they had misheard. 3 days, sir?" Buckmaster finally managed. "Yes, Captain. 3 days," Nimitz said firmly. "Our intelligence indicates the Japanese are planning a major operation against Midway Atoll. They'll be there with 4 carriers on June 4th. I need Yorktown ready to sail by May 30th. Lieutenant Commander H.J. Pfingstag, the yard's hull repair expert, swallowed hard before responding. "Yes, sir." In that moment, standing in the gradually draining dry dock, none of the men fully comprehended how their next 72 hours would alter the course of the Pacific War. Nor could they have known that across the vast ocean, Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was finalizing Operation MI, the invasion of Midway, with one crucial assumption. The USS Yorktown was either at the bottom of the Coral Sea or so badly damaged it would be out of action for months. The race against time had begun. Diverter Introduction and Context. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The surprise Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had left the U.S. Pacific Fleet in ruins. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged, along with numerous cruisers and destroyers. In a stroke of fortune that would later prove decisive, none of America's aircraft carriers were in port that day. In the months that followed, the U.S. Navy struggled to recover while Japanese forces swept across the Pacific. The Philippines fell. Singapore surrendered. The Dutch East Indies were overrun. By April 1942, Japan had established a defensive perimeter stretching from the Aleutian Islands to the Solomon Islands, controlling a vast oceanic empire. America's initial response was limited, but symbolically important. The Doolittle raid of April 18th saw 16 B-25 bombers launched from the USS Hornet to strike Tokyo. While militarily insignificant, the raid shocked Japanese leadership, who had assured their population that the home islands were invulnerable to attack. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, recognized that America's industrial might would eventually overwhelm Japan unless decisive action was taken. The Doolittle raid convinced him that eliminating America's remaining carrier force was an urgent priority. "The Americans' courage is not in question," Yamamoto reportedly told his staff. "It is time we dealt with their carriers once and for all." By early May, Yamamoto had begun preparations for Operation MI, a complex plan to lure the U.S. carriers into a decisive battle near Midway Atoll, where overwhelming Japanese naval power would destroy them. The operation would include a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands and a massive fleet including 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, commanded by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. Unknown to Yamamoto, American cryptanalysts led by Commander Joseph Rochefort at Station Haipo in Pearl Harbor had partially broken the Japanese Naval Code JN-25. Working around the clock in a basement facility, Rochefort's team had determined that a major Japanese operation against AF was imminent. Through a clever ruse, having Midway broadcast an uncoded message claiming their freshwater distillation plant had broken down, they confirmed that AF was indeed Midway when Japanese messages mentioned the water shortage. Admiral Nimitz now knew the Japanese plan, including the approximate timing and forces involved. But knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. To meet the threat, he needed every available carrier. The USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, forming Task Force 16 under Admiral Raymond Spruance, were available. But they would be outnumbered by Japan's 4 carriers. A third American carrier would significantly improve the odds, and the USS Yorktown, despite its battle damage, represented Nimitz's only option. The Yorktown had just emerged from the Battle of the Coral Sea, fought May 4th through 8th, 1942, the first naval battle in history where the opposing ships never sighted each other, with all attacks carried out by aircraft. During this engagement, American carriers Yorktown and Lexington had prevented a Japanese invasion of Port Moresby, New Guinea, and sunk the light carrier Shoho. However, Japanese aircraft had sunk the Lexington and severely damaged the Yorktown. A 551-pound armor-piercing bomb had penetrated Yorktown's flight deck and exploded deep inside the ship, killing or wounding 66 men. The explosion had destroyed multiple compartments and damaged the ship's boilers, limiting its speed. Near misses had buckled the hull plating and opened seams, causing flooding and an oil leak. Initial assessments from Rear Admiral Aubrey Fitch suggested repairs would take 90 days. The Japanese, tracking the damaged Yorktown as it limped away from the battle area trailing oil, had every reason to believe the carrier was out of action, if not sunk. This crucial misconception would form the foundation of their planning for Midway. As Captain Buckmaster guided the wounded Yorktown back to Pearl Harbor at reduced speed, neither he nor his crew could have imagined that in less than a month they would again face the same Japanese carriers that had damaged their ship, but under very different circumstances. Planning and Expectations, May 27, 1942, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The USS Yorktown limped into Pearl Harbor one day ahead of schedule, having maintained a steady 20 knots despite trailing oil for much of its 3,000-mile journey. As the carrier approached berth B-16, crowds of naval personnel gathered to witness its arrival. The damage was visible even from a distance: a patched hole in the flight deck, scarred hull plating, and the unmistakable list of a wounded vessel. In his headquarters overlooking the harbor, Admiral Nimitz was meeting with Commander Joseph Rochefort, whose intelligence team had been working without rest to decode Japanese transmissions. "They'll attack Midway on June 4th, Rochefort explained, spreading a chart across Nimitz's desk. "Nagumo's carrier force will approach from the northwest, while Yamamoto follows with the main body, including battleships and a landing force." "And they still believe Yorktown was sunk at Coral Sea?" Nimitz asked. "Yes, sir. Their intelligence reports mention only 2 operational American carriers, Enterprise and Hornet. They're expecting to outnumber us 2-1. Nimitz moved to the window, watching as tugs maneuvered the Yorktown into its berth. Then we'll need to give them a surprise. Within hours, Nimitz had assembled a planning team including Pearl Harbor's yard superintendent, Captain Claude Gillette, hull repair expert Lieutenant Commander H.J. Pfingstag, and engineering officer Commander Arnold True. Their task: determine whether the seemingly impossible repair timeline could be achieved. "Gentlemen," Nimitz began, "I need your honest assessment. Can Yorktown be made battle-worthy in 3 days?" The room fell silent as the men exchanged glances. Finally, Gillette spoke. "Admiral, standard procedure for a carrier with this damage would be 3 months in a major shipyard. Even making critical repairs only, conventional wisdom says 2 weeks minimum." "I'm not interested in conventional wisdom, Captain," Nimitz replied. "I'm interested in what can be done when the fate of the Pacific Fleet depends on it." Pfingstag, the hull specialist, cleared his throat. "Sir, we could weld rather than rivet the damaged hull sections. It won't be as strong or long-lasting, but it would be faster." Commander True added, "And we could focus only on systems absolutely necessary for combat operations. Anything that doesn't directly affect fighting capability can wait." "What about manpower?" Nimitz asked. "We'd need every welder, machinist, and yard worker available," Gillette replied, "working round the clock in shifts." "You'll have them," Nimitz assured him. "I'll authorize unlimited overtime, priority requisition of any materials needed, and full electrical power even if we have to dim the lights in Honolulu." By evening, the plan had taken shape. Critical repairs would focus on 3 areas: the hull damage to ensure watertight integrity, the flight deck to enable aircraft operations, and the propulsion system to provide adequate speed. Non-essential systems would be ignored. The work would proceed without formal blueprints or planning documents. Yard supervisors would consult the ship's original construction diagrams and make on-the-spot decisions. Captain Buckmaster, though skeptical of the timeline, threw himself into organizing the ship's crew to assist with repairs. Damage control parties who had fought to save the ship during and after the Coral Sea battle would now work alongside yard workers to resurrect it. Meanwhile, Japanese planning for Operation MI continued with full confidence. At his headquarters aboard the massive battleship Yamato, Admiral Yamamoto finalized the complex battle plan, involving multiple force groups across thousands of miles of ocean. Vice Admiral Nagumo, commander of the 1st Carrier Striking Force, reviewed intelligence reports on the American carriers. "Lexington confirmed sunk at Coral Sea," read one report. "Yorktown heavily damaged. Estimated repair time minimum 3 months. Only Enterprise and Hornet remain operational in the Pacific." This assessment reinforced the Japanese confidence in their 4-2 carrier advantage, a confidence that would prove tragically misplaced. At Pearl Harbor, as the Yorktown entered dry dock number 1 on the morning of May 28th, an unprecedented industrial effort was about to begin. 1,400 shipyard workers were being organized into 3 shifts to work around the clock. Hawaii Electric Company had been notified that the shipyard would require maximum power, necessitating rolling blackouts throughout Honolulu. In just 72 hours, they would attempt what Japanese naval planners considered impossible. Resurrect Intelligence and Preparations, May 29, 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. The sound was deafening. Hundreds of pneumatic hammers, welding torches, and cutting equipment created a constant industrial roar inside the hull of the Yorktown. Blue-white arcs of welding torches illuminated the interior spaces where men worked in cramped conditions, often standing in water that still leaked through damaged sections. Lieutenant Commander Pfingstag moved through the organized chaos, checking on critical repair areas. The damaged hull plating on the port side had been cut away entirely, and new sections were being welded into place. Rather than replacing the damaged internal frames, a job that would normally take weeks, workers were installing temporary wooden supports. "It's not pretty, and it's not permanent," Pfingstag explained to a visiting officer, "but it will hold for a few weeks. That's all we need." On the flight deck, another team was completing repairs to the bomb damage. The 5-foot hole had already been patched with new steel plating, but the supporting structure beneath required reinforcement. Again, where steel supports would normally be installed, shipyard workers were using heavy wooden timbers, sacrificing longevity for speed. Captain Buckmaster watched the work with mixed emotions. As Yorktown's commanding officer, he took immense pride in his ship, but harbored grave concerns about sending it back into combat with such makeshift repairs. "Will it really hold together?" he asked Commander Arnold True, who was overseeing the engineering repairs. "In normal times, I'd never certified these repairs as seaworthy," True admitted. "But these aren't normal times. The welds will hold against normal sea stresses, and the wooden supports should withstand flight operations. Beyond that," he shrugged, "we're betting on American engineering and a little bit of luck." Below decks, another critical issue was being addressed. The ship's boilers had been damaged, limiting its top speed. Complete repairs would require months, but engineers devised a workaround, bypassing the damaged superheaters to restore partial functionality. The Yorktown wouldn't reach its full designed speed of 33 knots, but it could manage between 28 and 30, enough to launch and recover aircraft. Beyond the physical repairs, other preparations were underway. The Yorktown's air group had suffered losses during Coral Sea and needed reinforcement. With the carrier USS Saratoga undergoing repairs on the west coast, some of its aircraft and pilots were transferred to Pearl Harbor by transport ship to join Yorktown's squadrons. New pilots had precious little time to familiarize themselves with the ship's procedures. Lieutenant Commander Oscar Peterson, commanding Yorktown's fighter squadron VF-3, worked frantically to integrate replacement pilots and aircraft. "We'll be going into combat with some pilots who've never landed on this carrier," he told Captain Buckmaster. "It's far from ideal, but they're well trained. They'll adapt." Throughout these preparations, intelligence continued to flow from Commander Rochefort's team at Station Haipo. New decoded messages confirmed the Japanese timetable and force composition. Critically, they revealed that Japanese intelligence still believed the Yorktown was out of action, a misconception that American forces were now working around the clock to exploit. Admiral Nimitz made multiple visits to the dry dock during the repair effort, each time marveling at the progress. During one inspection, he stopped to speak with a welder who had been working for nearly 18 hours straight. "How much longer can you keep this pace up?" Nimitz asked. The exhausted worker looked up from his torch. "As long as it takes, Admiral. We know what's at stake." This sentiment permeated the entire repair effort. Every worker understood that their welding torch, wrench, or hammer represented America's response to Pearl Harbor. The Yorktown had become more than just a ship. It was a symbol of American resilience and industrial might. As the second day of repairs concluded, Captain Gillette provided an update to Nimitz. Against all expectations, they were ahead of schedule. The hull repairs were nearly complete, the flight deck was operational, and engineers reported the propulsion system would be ready for sea trials by the following morning. "I've never seen anything like it, Admiral," Gillette admitted. "We're doing 3 months of work in 3 days." "That's exactly what I expected," Nimitz replied with quiet confidence. "When Americans understand what's at stake, There's nothing they can't accomplish. Across the Pacific, Japanese forces were already in motion. Admiral Nagumo's carrier force had departed from Hashirajima anchorage on May 26th, steaming east toward Midway. In his flagship Akagi, Nagumo reviewed the operational plans one final time, confident in Japanese naval superiority. His 4 carriers carried a combined force of over 275 aircraft, a striking power that had devastated Pearl Harbor and swept Allied forces from the Western Pacific. The Americans will respond with Enterprise and Hornet once we strike Midway, Nagumo told his staff officers. When they do, we will be waiting with overwhelming force. Neither he nor any Japanese commander imagined that a third American carrier, one they believed was either sunk or months from repair, was being frantically restored to fighting condition through an unprecedented industrial effort. Opening actions, May 30th, 1942. Pearl Harbor Naval Base. At precisely 6:30 in the morning, the USS Yorktown emerged from dry dock number 1, its hull freshly painted to conceal the hasty repairs. To casual observers, the carrier showed no obvious signs of the damage it had suffered less than a month earlier at Coral Sea. Only those who had worked on the ship knew the truth. Beneath its restored exterior, the Yorktown was held together by emergency welds, wooden supports, and the determination of its crew. Captain Buckmaster stood on the bridge, watching as tugs maneuvered the carrier away from the dock. He had slept barely 8 hours over the past 3 days, overseeing repairs and preparing his crew for what was to come. Now, as the Yorktown moved under its own power for the first time since entering Pearl Harbor, he felt both pride and apprehension. Engine room reports, "All systems functioning within parameters, Captain," reported the officer of the deck. "We're maintaining 20 knots with no unusual vibration." Buckmaster nodded. The shipyard workers had accomplished what many considered impossible, making the Yorktown battle-worthy in just 72 hours. Whether their hasty repairs would withstand combat conditions remained to be seen. On the pier, Admiral Nimitz watched the carrier's departure with Lieutenant Commander Fingstag, the hull repair specialist who had overseen much of the work. "She looks good, doesn't she?" Nimitz remarked. "Yes, sir," Fingstag replied, though his expression revealed lingering concerns. "The repairs should hold for a few weeks at least." "That's all we need," Nimitz said, "just long enough to meet the Japanese at Midway." As the Yorktown moved toward the harbor entrance, it passed the sunken hulk of the USS Arizona, a grim reminder of the surprise attack 6 months earlier that had plunged America into war. Many of the men aboard silently acknowledged the symbolic connection between their mission and the Arizona's sacrifice. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commander of Task Force 17, with Yorktown as his flagship, joined Buckmaster on the bridge. Fletcher had led the American forces at Coral Sea and would command the combined American carrier force at Midway. "Your yard workers performed a miracle, Captain," Fletcher observed. "The Japanese will be quite surprised to see us." "Let's hope they don't get too close a look, Admiral," Buckmaster replied. "We're seaworthy, but we're not pretty underneath." Throughout the day, the Yorktown conducted abbreviated sea trials, testing its engines, steering, and flight operations. Despite the limited superheater capacity, the carrier managed to reach 28 knots, sufficient for launching and recovering aircraft. Flight deck crews practiced emergency repair procedures, knowing that battle damage might require quick fixes to maintain air operations. By evening, the Yorktown was ready for war once more. As the sun set over the Pacific, Fletcher gave the order that would send the hastily repaired carrier toward its rendezvous with destiny. Set course for Midway. Speed 20 knots. Nearly 4,000 miles to the west, Admiral Nagumo's carrier force continued its eastward journey, maintaining strict radio silence. On June 1st, they would be joined by the Midway occupation force and the main body, under Yamamoto himself. The massive Japanese fleet, the most powerful naval force ever assembled in the Pacific, moved with supreme confidence toward what they believed would be a decisive victory. Neither Nagumo nor Yamamoto had any inkling that their carefully constructed trap was about to be turned against them. American codebreakers had revealed their plans, and the supposedly crippled Yorktown was steaming to join Enterprise and Hornet northeast of Midway. The stage was set for one of history's most consequential naval battles, a battle in which the hastily repaired Yorktown would play a crucial role before meeting its ultimate fate. The critical moment, June 4th, 1942. USS Yorktown, Task Force 17, northeast of Midway Atoll. The first rays of dawn illuminated the flight deck of the USS Yorktown as flight crews prepared aircraft for the coming battle. On the bridge, Rear Admiral Fletcher studied the latest intelligence reports with Captain Buckmaster. A Japanese carrier force had been detected approaching Midway from the northwest, exactly as predicted by Rochefort's codebreakers. "Launch the search aircraft," Fletcher ordered, "and prepare a full strike package once we have a confirmed position." Below decks, Engineering Officer Lieutenant Commander John F. Delaney moved through the makeshift repair areas, checking the hastily welded seams and temporary wooden supports that held the carrier together. The ship had been at sea for 5 days now, and the emergency repairs were holding, though strange creaks and groans echoed through the hull during high-speed maneuvers. "How's she holding up?" asked Chief Machinist's mate Claude Hamaker, who had supervised much of the machinery repair work at Pearl Harbor. "Better than expected," Delaney replied, knocking on one of the wooden support beams. "Those yard workers at Pearl did one hell of a job." Neither man voiced what both were thinking, that the Yorktown's hastily repaired systems would soon face the ultimate test in combat. At 9:48, a scout plane radioed the electrifying message. "Enemy carriers sighted." Yurdum, the pilot, reported 2 Japanese carriers, part of Nagumo's force, approximately 175 miles from the American task force. Fletcher immediately ordered a full strike launched from Yorktown, while coordinating with Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Enterprise and Hornet in Task Force 16. By 10:30, Yorktown's air group was airborne, a potent force of 17 dive bombers, 12 torpedo bombers, and 6 fighters heading toward the reported position of the Japanese carriers. What followed would become one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. American dive bombers from Enterprise struck the Japanese carriers Kaga and Akagi, while Yorktown's bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, found and attacked the carrier Soryu. Within minutes, 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers were ablaze, their flight decks transformed into infernos as fueled and armed aircraft caught fire. Aboard the Japanese carrier Hiryu, the sole undamaged ship of Nagumo's force, Vice Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi received the shocking reports with stunned disbelief. 3 carriers hit? "Impossible!" he exclaimed. More shocking was the identification of American forces. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Matsuda reported, "Sir, survivors from Soryu report they were attacked by aircraft from the Yorktown." "Yorktown?" Yamaguchi repeated incredulously. "Our intelligence confirmed it was severely damaged at Coral Sea. It couldn't possibly have been repaired so quickly." This was the critical moment, the revelation that would fundamentally alter Japanese perception of American industrial capabilities. The carrier they believed was either sunk or months from repair was not only operational, but had just helped deliver a devastating blow to the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Americans must have 2 carriers named Yorktown, Matsuda suggested desperately. Or our pilots misidentified the ship at Coral Sea. Yamaguchi shook his head slowly, comprehension dawning. No, the Americans repaired it. In weeks, not months. He turned to his air staff officer. Launch everything we have against this Yorktown. We must eliminate it now. By early afternoon, Hiryu had launched 2 separate strike forces against the American carriers. The first wave, 18 dive bombers escorted by 6 Zero fighters, located the Yorktown at 12:40. Despite the best efforts of the combat air patrol and anti-aircraft fire, 3 bombs struck the carrier. The first bomb blasted a hole in the flight deck near the island superstructure. The second penetrated 4 decks before exploding, starting fires and knocking out several boilers. The third hit near the forward elevator, causing additional damage and fires. The hastily repaired carrier now faced its ultimate test. Damage control parties, many of whom had helped save the ship at Coral Sea, rushed to contain the fires and flooding. The wooden support beams installed at Pearl Harbor groaned under the new stresses, but remarkably, they held. Within an hour, the fires were under control, and Yorktown's flight deck was again operational, though the ship had lost power temporarily and slowed to a stop. Japanese pilots returning to Hiryu reported success. Yorktown burning, dead in the water. But once again, the Yorktown and its crew would demonstrate remarkable resilience. By 2:30, power had been partially restored, fires contained, and the carrier was making headway again, although at reduced speed. At around 5 o'clock, the second Japanese attack wave, 14 torpedo bombers, found the recovering carrier. Despite desperate evasive maneuvers and anti-aircraft fire, 2 torpedoes struck Yorktown's port side, ironically, very near the area that had been so hastily repaired at Pearl Harbor. This time, the damage was catastrophic. The torpedo impacts ripped open the hull, flooding critical compartments. The list to port increased rapidly, eventually reaching 26 degrees. Captain Buckmaster faced the grim reality. Despite the heroic efforts at Pearl Harbor and the equally heroic damage control work of his crew, the Yorktown could not be saved. At 5:20, he gave the order to abandon ship. As sailors orderly evacuated the stricken carrier, many cast last glances at the vessel that had survived so much. From Coral Sea to the miracle repairs at Pearl Harbor, to its critical role at Midway. Though mortally wounded, the Yorktown had fulfilled its mission. 3 Japanese carriers were sinking, and the 4th, Hiryu, would soon join them, struck by dive bombers from Enterprise late that afternoon. The tide of the Pacific War had turned, and it had turned because a ship that should have been out of action had instead steamed into battle after an industrial miracle that Japanese commanders had considered impossible. Immediate aftermath and perspective. June 6, 1942. USS Astoria, Task Force 17. Rear Admiral Fletcher stood on the bridge of the cruiser Astoria, watching salvage operations on the USS Yorktown. Remarkably, the carrier remained afloat despite severe torpedo damage and flooding. Destroyer USS Haman had come alongside to provide power for pumps, and damage control parties were back aboard, attempting to save the vessel. "She's a stubborn ship," observed Captain Buckmaster, who had returned to his vessel with a volunteer salvage team. The yard workers at Pearl would be proud to see how their repairs held up. Indeed, post-battle assessment revealed that many of the emergency repairs made during those frantic 72 hours at Pearl Harbor had withstood combat stresses remarkably well. The welded hull sections had maintained integrity even under near-miss explosions. The wooden support beams had held through violent maneuvers and bomb impacts. It was only the direct torpedo hits, damage that would have crippled any carrier regardless of condition, that had finally overcome the Yorktown. As salvage operations continued, messages of congratulation poured in from Washington to Pearl Harbor. President Roosevelt, informed of the stunning victory at Midway, particularly noted the Yorktown's contribution after its rapid repair. In Tokyo, the Imperial Japanese Navy's high command struggled to comprehend the magnitude of their defeat. 4 fleet carriers, the core of Japan's naval striking power, had been sunk. Over 3,000 sailors and airmen had been lost, including many irreplaceable veteran pilots. Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, wrote in his diary, "The presence of Yorktown at the battle is inexplicable. Our intelligence was certain this ship was severely damaged at Coral Sea. Its appearance at Midway represents an American repair capability we did not believe possible." This revelation forced a fundamental reassessment of Japanese strategy. If American shipyards could repair major battle damage in days rather than months, Japan's ability to inflict meaningful attrition was severely compromised. The implications extended beyond naval warfare to the entire strategic balance in the Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack and was now recovering from appendicitis, interviewed survivors from the 4 lost carriers. He was stunned to learn of the Yorktown's presence. "How could they repair it so quickly?" he asked repeatedly. "Our own yards would require months for similar damage." The answer lay in America's superior industrial organization, technical innovation, and the extraordinary determination of Pearl Harbor's workforce. The 1,400 workers who had labored around the clock for 72 hours represented America's secret weapon, industrial capacity that Japan could not match. At Pearl Harbor, the naval shipyard received formal commendation from Admiral Nimitz. Captain Gillette, who had overseen the miraculous repair effort, gathered the key supervisors and engineers to share the news of Yorktown's crucial role at Midway. "What you accomplished in 3 days helped change the course of the war," he told them. "Though the Yorktown is severely damaged, it served long enough to help sink 1 Japanese carrier and fight off attacks that might otherwise have targeted Enterprise or Hornet." Lieutenant Commander Pfingstag, the hull repair specialist who had somehow made the impossible deadline work, responded simply, "We only did what needed to be done. Any American shipyard would have done the same." This matter-of-fact attitude characterized the American approach to industrial warfare. While Japanese military culture emphasized fighting spirit and tactical brilliance, American leaders increasingly recognized that victory would come through production capacity, technical innovation, and logistics. The experience gained during the emergency repair of Yorktown would inform American naval practice throughout the war. Damage control techniques, emergency repair procedures, and organizational methods developed during those 72 hours would be codified and taught to shipyard workers and naval personnel across the Pacific. The human dimension of the repairs represented an equally important legacy. The diversity of the Pearl Harbor workforce, including native Hawaiians, Japanese Americans, working under suspicion after Pearl Harbor, women entering industrial roles for the first time, and veteran shipwrights, demonstrated America's ability to unify diverse populations toward a common goal. Unfortunately, the Yorktown story would have one final tragic chapter. At 1:17 p.m. on June 6th, the Japanese submarine I-168 penetrated the screen of destroyers protecting the wounded carrier. It fired 4 torpedoes, 2 struck the Yorktown, and 1 hit the destroyer Hammond alongside, breaking it in 2. The destroyer sank within minutes, while the Yorktown, having survived so much, finally succumbed to its wounds. After remaining afloat through the night, the carrier rolled over and sank at dawn on June 7th, carrying with it the evidence of the miracle repairs that had given it a final, decisive mission. Strategic Consequences, July 15, 1942. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Admiral Yamamoto sat silently as staff officers presented their analysis of the Midway defeat. The loss of 4 fleet carriers and hundreds of irreplaceable pilots had fundamentally altered the strategic balance in the Pacific. But one aspect of the battle continued to perplex Japanese planners. Our intelligence assessment of American repair capabilities was catastrophically wrong, stated Captain Kameto Kuroshima, Yamamoto's senior staff officer. The Yorktown's presence at Midway demonstrates repair speeds we had considered impossible. This revelation forced Japanese naval leaders to confront a devastating reality. America's industrial capacity represented a dimension of warfare they had severely underestimated. If battle damage that Japanese yards would require months to repair could be fixed by Americans in days, the entire calculus of attrition warfare collapsed. The implications extended far beyond naval repair. Japanese strategy had been built on the assumption that American morale would crumble after initial defeats, leading to a negotiated peace. Instead, the United States had demonstrated not only the will to fight, but the industrial capacity to rapidly replace losses. In Washington, the Naval Board reviewed reports from Midway with particular attention to the Yorktown repairs. The emergency techniques developed at Pearl Harbor were being studied for application throughout the fleet. More importantly, the psychological impact of the repair feat had resonated throughout the naval establishment. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, summarized the lesson in a memo to Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox. The Yorktown repair demonstrates that American technical ingenuity, when properly motivated and organized, can accomplish what enemy planners consider impossible. This capability represents a strategic advantage perhaps more significant than any tactical innovation. Indeed, as the Pacific War progressed, America's industrial advantage would prove decisive. By 1944, American shipyards were producing Essex-class aircraft carriers at the rate of 1 per month, each more powerful than any carrier Japan had lost at Midway. Japanese naval construction, constrained by limited industrial capacity and resources, could not begin to match this pace. Commander Joseph Rochefort, whose code-breaking had been instrumental to the Midway victory, later reflected, "The Japanese never fully comprehended American industrial potential. The Yorktown repair was just the first demonstration of what our shipyards and factories could accomplish when fully mobilized." The human aspect of the repair effort had equally profound consequences. The diverse workforce at Pearl Harbor, representing America's multicultural society, stood in stark contrast to the ethnically homogeneous Japanese Empire. This diversity, initially seen as a weakness by Japanese strategists, proved to be a source of strength, bringing together varied perspectives and skills in service of a common goal. For Japanese naval officers, the psychological impact of discovering the Yorktown at Midway created a crisis of confidence. If they had been so wrong about American repair capabilities, what other assumptions might be flawed? This uncertainty would influence Japanese decision-making throughout the remainder of the war, contributing to increasingly cautious deployments of remaining naval assets. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, later wrote, "The appearance of Yorktown at Midway, after we believed it crippled or sunk, created a sense that American industrial capacity was almost magical. This impression deepened as the war continued, until many Japanese officers came to believe that American production advantages made eventual defeat inevitable." The emergency repair of the Yorktown thus represented more than a technical achievement. It became a symbol of fundamental differences between the opposing powers. Japan, with limited industrial capacity and resources, could not replace combat losses at a sustainable rate. America, with vast industrial potential, could not only replace losses, but continuously expand its forces. Admiral Nimitz, reflecting on the Midway victory years later, observed, "The work of those 1,400 shipyard workers during those 72 hours at Pearl Harbor was as important to the outcome as any combat action. They demonstrated that American industrial power, properly applied, could overcome even the most dire circumstances." Epilogue, September 17, 1945. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. Lieutenant Commander H.J. Pfingstag, now promoted to commander, stood at the edge of Dry Dock No. 1, the same facility where, 3 years earlier, he had overseen the miraculous repair of the USS Yorktown. Around him, the shipyard continued its work, though the urgent wartime pace had slowed with Japan's surrender the previous month. Many of the workers who had participated in the Yorktown repair had moved on, some to other shipyards, others to civilian life. A few had lost their lives when Japanese submarines shelled Oahu in subsequent attacks, but their collective achievement had become part of naval legend, 72 hours of round-the-clock labor that helped change the course of the Pacific War. "Hard to believe it's been 3 years," remarked Captain Claude Gillette, the yard superintendent who had coordinated the repair effort. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Pfingstag replied. "Other times, like another lifetime." The repair of the Yorktown had influenced naval practice throughout the remainder of the war. Emergency repair techniques developed during those 3 frantic days had been refined and applied across the Pacific. Forward repair ships and floating dry docks had been deployed to advanced bases, enabling damaged vessels to return to combat without the long journey back to major shipyards. Perhaps more significantly, the psychological impact of the repair had resonated throughout the war. American sailors knew that their nation would make extraordinary efforts to repair damaged ships and return them to battle. Japanese commanders never fully recovered from the shock of discovering that American industrial capacity could accomplish what they had deemed impossible. The USS Yorktown itself now lay at the bottom of the Pacific, finally succumbing to torpedo damage 2 days after the Battle of Midway. But its legacy lived on in the 15 Essex-class carriers that had been built during the war. Massive vessels that dwarfed their predecessor in size and capability. In September 1947, a new aircraft carrier would be commissioned, bearing the name USS Yorktown, CV-10. This second Yorktown would serve with distinction for nearly 3 decades, a living memorial to its namesake and to the miracle workers of Pearl Harbor who had given the first Yorktown its final, decisive mission. The story of the Yorktown's repair represented more than a technical achievement. It embodied the American approach to warfare, where Japanese military culture emphasized the warrior spirit. American victory ultimately came through industrial might, technical innovation, and organizational efficiency. "You know what I remember most?" Gillette asked, breaking the silence. "What's that?" "When Nimitz came down into the dry dock, with water still around his ankles, and told us we had 3 days. The look on everyone's face was priceless." Pfingstag laughed. "I thought you were going to have a heart attack right there." "But we did it," Gillette said simply. "Yes," Pfingstag agreed. "We did it." In that moment, 3 years earlier, standing ankle-deep in seawater at the bottom of Dry Dock No. 1, none of the men had fully comprehended how their work would impact the course of the war. They had simply faced an impossible task and found a way to accomplish it. Through innovation, determination, and the collective effort of 1,400 dedicated workers, the miracle repair of the USS Yorktown had demonstrated that in modern warfare, industrial capacity could be as decisive as courage under fire. It was a lesson the Japanese learned too late, and one that would shape American military planning for generations to come. For the 1,400 workers who made the impossible possible in those 72 frantic hours at Pearl Harbor, their contribution to victory was as significant as any one on the battlefield. Through their skill, determination, and ingenuity, they had given the USS Yorktown one final mission, a mission that helped turn the tide of the Pacific War.